So I'm starting the webinar right from the start, a guide to planning your best practice sustainability education and engagement project. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Sue Martin from New South Wales A2 E2 Exec. We have Jem Hansen, who's also going to help present. Main presenter will be Erica Van Schillebeck over there, and Mel, who is joining us by phone and will be hopefully able to join us by video. We're here as a team to help you, and so we're going to share the load. Just to get started in the webinar, I will do an acknowledgement of the country and then just go through a few tips. And but I might say the first tip is to ask everybody to go on mute. So if everybody who's not talking at a point, if you're able to do mute, that would be fantastic. And if you're having trouble at any point, please just do something in chat, and as a group, we'll try and help you out and use that as a way of communicating a bit as well. So just as we gather for our webinar today, let us acknowledge the local traditional custodians of this land, for they have performed age-old ceremonies of storytelling, music, dance, celebrations, and renewal, and along with all Aboriginal people hold the memories, the traditions, the culture, and the hopes of Aboriginal Australia. Let us also acknowledge this living culture and its unique role in the life of Australia today. Finally, let us acknowledge with honour and respect our elders past, present, and future, and pay our respects to those who have and still do guide us with their wisdom. And this is based on an acknowledgement of country developed by the New South Wales Department of Education. So I just want to acknowledge them for that. I think it's a beautiful way of expressing the depth of knowledge and wisdom that we gain from our First Peoples. I also want to just run through a few things about our webinar. It is being recorded, and that recording will be uploaded to the A2E2 national website. There is a members section on that website that you'll be able to continue the discussion going. I've mentioned about muting while we're talking, but feel free to put something into the chat post, and if you need to, please do ask a question. And now I'm going to pass it over to Mel, who's going to just do a bit of an icebreaker for us. There she is. Can we hear you? No.
No, can't hear you, Mel.
So I think what we'll do is we'll just ask everybody.
Okay, here we are.
Great.
There we go. Okay, thanks everyone for bearing with me on that one. So we just thought to begin with that we would just get a bit of feedback from you guys who have given the time up to come to this. We really appreciate you all being here, and we want it to be a learning circle. We want it to be a process that has feedback in it. So we thought we would begin by just finding out a little bit about what you hope to get out of today's session, and sort of what motivated you to come. We're talking about planning, we're talking about best practice, and we're really hoping to address sort of the queries that you guys have. So does anyone want to break the ice with why they've come today?
I'm happy to share since no one's starting. So I'm Sandra from Broome in the Kimberley. And I didn't actually know anything about what it was about because the title just said right from the start. So I thought I would come and have a look at, right from the start of what. So now for the first time I'm seeing what your title is, and it looks really interesting. And I'm an old, very old environmental educator and sustainability educator.
Fantastic. Great to have you, Sandra. Anyone else? Challenges with best practice, looking for tips?
I'll share.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Hi, I'm a slightly lapsed, I guess, environmental educator and getting back into the area at the moment. So part of this is I've been trying to get my own business off the ground, and I figured that this could be helpful towards that, but also some of the volunteer groups that I'm part of are working on some engagement and education projects at the moment. So I thought this would be useful for that.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully we can address some of those questions as we go through the presentation. We'll have about half an hour on the presentation, and then there'll be hopefully a big chunk of time, maybe 45 minutes or so, for us to have questions and share ideas together. So yeah, we're looking for some input from you guys too. That's great. Thank you. Anyone else have any burning reasons why they joined in today? Anything particular they're looking for advice on, or?
Yeah, not so much looking for advice, but I was just looking to see how the project finished up. As I sat on the project reference group and was also involved as a sustainability leader in Western New South Wales. So I thought it'd be good to see how this finished up. It's a good output from the work that we put in collectively around the state.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Finished up and also just beginning. We've got more coming as well. So it's great you can be with us, Andy. You did some great work. Got an expert already.
I'm Barbara, and I'm just always interested in engaging with others and hearing the great work that's going on and how we can add it to what we're already doing at school and with my environmental groups.
Excellent. Thanks, Barbara.
Hi, yes, Cam here. I'm having a little respite from a full-day planning meeting for the 18 conference, so it's been full-on, flat-out exercise. And I think I'm a little bit older than Sandra because I've got a little bit more grey hair, but we won't go there. Been around the game for a long time and looking for shared ideas.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cam. Make the conference best practice. Or it will be.
We're trying.
It will be. Thanks, Cam. Anyone else want to share where they're up to here or where they're from, what they're hoping to get out of today?
I'll jump in, Mel. It's Jem here.
Thanks, Jem.
Look, I'm one of the presenters, so I got roped into it. Didn't have a lot of choice, but I'm actually hoping that going through some of this stuff again and then talking to new people about it will just sort of refresh and re-energise me, I guess, on that. That's probably the main thing I'd hope to leave within an hour and a half or so.
Excellent. Thanks, Jem. Well, I guess one thing I'll say is that perhaps as we're working through the presentation over the next little while, start thinking about a project that you've worked on that you would consider best practice, or maybe a project you've been involved in that you feel had really good best practice elements, and maybe see as we're going through the presentation if you can identify what those elements were, what made it stand out to you as that was a really great project that got good outcomes, and maybe you can see some of the elements of that project in what we present this afternoon, and then we'll have an opportunity at the end to reflect on what really has worked in projects we've done and have a really good discussion about how we can support each other to deliver best practice projects going forward. So I'll hand over to Jem now to take us through a little bit of the background that has led to these resources. Thanks, Jem.
Okay, thanks, Mel. All right, so yeah, Jem Hanson, my name. I'm in Port Macquarie, New South Wales. I'm the Vice President of the state chapter for the association, and I've been chair of the working group for the Make the Change framework for the last few years. So that's, I guess, where my few minutes here in introductions is grounded. And it's just to give a bit of a background because the Make the Change framework is kind of the reason why the project evolved, and which then generated the guide, which is what Erica's going to spend most of the presentation today talking us through. So yeah, the guide to planning and best practice sustainability education engagement was an output from the project, which is listed at the top there on the dot point, equipping regional sustainability education networks for creating change. That was a environmental trust funded project that went for 2 years, about $100,000 from the New South Wales Environmental Trust. The first part of it was to do a skills development and capacity building project for sustainability educators, and we had about 100 applicants, and originally intended to have 30 or so participants, and we managed to find the money to get 40 or so people through that, through a sort of 6-month skills development program. And then they went back to their networks, which we then also provided support for. So across New South Wales, realising most of you guys aren't in New South Wales, but there was already sort of established, and some had sort of faded away, but were still maybe sitting there, and others were quite strong, and others had never really got going. But geographically based regional sustainability educator networks were kind of there. So in Sydney, there's Northern Sydney, Western Sydney, Southern Sydney. Then there's Hunter in the just north of there, and Illawarra South, and moving up the coast, there's there's Mid North Coast and North Coast. And so we, but yeah, like I said, most of those weren't very active. So a key part of the project was to reinvigorate those groups or establish regional environmental education networks where there wasn't already one. So there might have been 3 or 4 or 5 that you could say were active when we started, and at the end we've got 11 networks which are much stronger and have collaborated within their network to run a program where the grant provided a small amount of funds to help them do an on-ground collaborative project. And this guide was built to guide the development of those projects, because the trust required tangible environmental benefits, so measurable environmental improvements, meeting their criteria. We wanted collaboration, because that's what it was all about for us, was to see cross-sectoral collaboration within these geographically based regional groups. And obviously there's a lot of good guidance for best practice out there, but we actually found that there wasn't something current and strong that we could just use. So we built this one. And Erica was the driver of that as the project officer for the grant project, and did an awesome job, and will talk us through that soon. So that grant project, we applied for that after producing the Make the Change framework, which is the New South Wales Framework for Education and Engagement for Sustainability 2014 to 21. And that arose because New South Wales used to have learning for sustainability plans, but the last one expired in 2010, and the state government didn't renew or sort of redo something to fill that space. So after some research, which they did do, and a lot of lobbying and sort of work that the association did, the state government funded our association, the New South Wales A²E², to develop a framework for the state, which we did over the course of a year or two or whatever, with heaps of consultation and research backing that. Unfortunately, the state government didn't then adopt it, but they did agree to let us use it. So there's a deed of license to allow us to use the Make the Change framework as a state government framework to promote and support best practice environmental education. And one of the key parts of that framework was that we need strong regional and sector networks in our industry to provide the support and collaborative opportunities to the individuals and the organisations who are involved. And those networks needed a statewide hub or coordinating body or something to for them to sort of have a flow on from individual organisation through the regional networks up to a statewide coordination. And that's the role that our association chapter is trying to fill. It's not easy without any solid funding backing, but one of the things we did was get that grant, and we've now secured another one for the next few years to try to provide that support and encouragement and tools and resources to the regional networks. So sorry, that was a bit patchy, but there's a long history behind it. And I guess that was the point I wanted to make, was that was to sort of outline our role and how this guide for best practice came to be, and how it will be used in the future through those regional networks as well, we hope. So if anyone has any sort of questions on that, if it was too confusing or whatever, I'm happy to talk a bit more, but otherwise we'll move on. Which I think is to Mel, yeah. Are you still there, Mel? Yep.
I am, thanks, Tim. So sort of a great way to start off is to look at some guiding principles. It kind of gives us, speaking of frameworks, a framework to look at what are some of the core elements that make a project stand out as best practice. And we've taken these from the framework and the research and consultation that we did when developing the framework. That was based on feedback from hundreds of educators that we worked with through that time to get their input into the development of that framework, and also the generally accepted principles of EFS that many of you would be familiar with. So there's 6 really great best practice guiding principles. The first one is a fairly obvious one, that we really need to be operating within the values of sustainability. If our projects aren't achieving sustainable outcomes, as we would define them as balancing the needs of the social and the economic along with the planet's ecological limits, you know, there's a little problem there with doing a best practice sustainability project. The second one that is really important to consider is that encouragement of the community to be active citizens in caring for our environment. So we really want to build their capacity and get them actively engaged in a project at a grassroots level, and feeling motivated and enabled to take that project forward and to be part of it, not just a recipient of a program that we have to continue to deliver. A third really important principle is that reflection and embracing and reflecting local Aboriginal culture and heritage, place-based learning, cultural learning, you know, the best projects that we're looking at, and it sort of links in with point 6, which I'll come to soon, is when we work in partnership with those who know the land we're working on and know the cycles of that land and the history of it, and can bring really valuable reflections to the projects that we're doing. So that's absolutely a critical part. More than that, but in addition to that, it needs to be relevant to the target audience that we're working with. Even if you had all of these principles, but what you're delivering isn't relevant and isn't meeting a need of theirs, then it's probably not going to move them to action and truly engage them in the work that you're doing. So we want to make sure we know what they're trying to get out of the project, and we want to really engage them in a process of their own critical reflection, those action learning processes, problem solving, envisioning, all of that to really get them engaged with the program that you're running. Number 5 is to check that we're getting it right as we go. So we really need to build those opportunities for reflection and monitoring and evaluation all the way through to check and get feedback that we're achieving the outcomes that we hope we are, that we're meeting the needs we hope we are, and that the audience is tracking with us and getting motivated and engaged to take it forward themselves. So that reflection is a really important part of some of the best projects that you'll deliver and be part of. And the last one sort of really rounds it all out, and that's that we need to be making sure we're collaborating with a really diverse range of partners. It'll bring new ideas, new approaches, it'll help ground truth, some of the assumptions we might have about our projects, and potentially even open up some great new opportunities. So that reaching it, sometimes it feels easier to not reach out and just to run a project on your own or to stick with the sector that you're a part of. But there really is such an enrichment of our projects when we reach out and collaborate with diverse partners from different sectors. And I'll bring it back. If you've got that project in your mind of something that you've been part of or have run yourself in the past that you thought, yeah, that was such a great project, we really nailed that. I wonder if you can see some or all, hopefully, of these 6 elements in that project and what made it so great, and really keep those things in your mind as we continue to work through the elements of a best practice project and the practicality of it. How do we do it? Which is what Erica is going to take us through. So do keep those principles in your mind as we're going through.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Erica Van Shelbeck. I'm in not so sunny Sawtell on the mid-north coast of New South Wales at the moment. And thanks for being here today. All of this information that we're talking about is basically in the guide called Right from the Start, which is on our website, and at the end of this we'll show you the link to that. So I'm just sort of letting you know that all of this information is in the guide right from the start. Template in it, guidance in blue boxes and things like that. So that's the resource that we're really discussing today. So there are about 10 things you need to think about when you're planning a best practice sustainability education project. The first one is obviously, will there be an environmental benefit, and what will it be? We know as environmental educators the theory that the first step in someone becoming environmentally active as a citizen is knowledge. Many of you may know the Freeman Tilden quote from 1957 from his US National Park Service Administration Manual, where he said, through interpretation, understanding, through understanding, appreciation, and through appreciation, protection. However, those familiar with the environmental psychologist Doug Mackenzie Moore also know that he has pointed out that programs that rely solely on providing information often have little or no effect on behaviour. So even though we may like to assume that education is enough to start people on their transformative journey to become eco-warriors like us, our programs need to engage people to get them to make a commitment to take action. And we then need to help these people to make it really easy for them to take that action. And just as importantly, we need to be able to show that these actions taken by the community have actually helped the environment. Because it's just not enough to assume that education leads to protection. And when we do assume this, we open ourselves up to criticism and funding cuts by government managers who then just sort of think environmental education is just this warm and fuzzy thing that you do that doesn't have any tangible, measurable benefits to the environment that they can report upon. So when you plan your next environmental education program, you know, we always need to think about what environmental benefits will occur if my project is successful. The second one is being precise in your knowing who your target audience is. So the more precise you can be, the better, because then you have a better chance of reaching them. And this is really critical for successful community engagement. For your education and engagement activities to be a success, these activities have to meet the needs of the target audience. So this means that somebody coming new, maybe you want to just mute your microphone. That would I can hear someone making a cup of tea, which I would love, but this virtual world isn't good enough for you to make me a cup of tea. Yeah, so for your activity to be a success, you have to meet the needs of your target audience, and you need to design your activity to suit the typical behaviours and characteristics of your audience so that it fits in with their lives and schedules. You know, for example, if you're running an activity where you want to reach mothers with babies, you wouldn't run that activity in the late afternoon. You know, you'd run it in mid-morning, the same time as a mothers group meeting. And, you know, if you don't know that much about your target audience, that's when you talk to someone who does, so that you can design things to benefit them. For your project to be, to successfully lead to long-term behaviour change, your activities need to increase the skills and capacity of your target audience so that they also learn new skills to take ongoing action to care for our environment. And if your project's activities are meeting the needs of your target audience, it follows that at the end, your project, both your environment and your community should have benefited. And it's really important to articulate these personal benefits. This is the what's in it for me. And this is really important for marketing your activity, but it's often overlooked. To do this, you need to look beyond the educational benefits of the activity, and you need to think about what are some of the social, economic, and health benefits that the activity will bring to your audience. So, you know, by coming to your activity, are people going to make new friends? By doing your program, are they going to save money? By coming to your event, are they going to eat nice food? It seems really common sense, but people quite often overlook it. We thought we would just sort of throw this out to the learning circle for some examples of projects that you're running where you've actually designed your activities to really personally benefit the target audience. If you wanted to share with us how your project brings a personal benefit to your target audience, we can open it up now if anyone would like to jump in with an example.
Erica, just while the others are thinking, I'll jump in with one that wasn't mine, but I really liked it because I read it recently. One of the case studies from that recent project was the Clean Green Canteens project in the Central Coast. And they used as sort of prize incentives pamper packs, acknowledging that mostly the people volunteering in the canteens are, are the mums. So I thought I just really liked that when I read it, that they'd identified that and used pamper packs. I don't know what it was exactly, but stuff appropriate for the people volunteering their time there.
Yeah, that was a great one, Jem. I think it was a massage and other things that were really targeted towards the working women, busy women who run canteens and volunteer in canteens. So yeah, that's a great example.
One of the projects I ran a few years ago was on energy saving tips and tricks. And I actually gave away a pack of energy saving products, things like door smacks and light globes and those sorts of things. But then I got the quid pro quo was that the people gave me their phone number, their name and phone number, and their approximate energy bill from the last time they got their energy bill. And so I rang them a year later to see that bill had been reduced by the actions that they took and the behaviours that they changed from the learning that I provided. And that worked quite well. I didn't follow it up fully, to be honest, but it worked quite well in principle.
Yeah, that's Andy, great example of that, benefit of saving money or being given something that will help them to save money or help them to adopt a new behaviour that would otherwise seem a little bit hard to do. Anyone else?
Cam here. The project I'm reflecting on is the Queensland statewide Sustainable Schools program that ran from 2010 to 12, given the name of EarthSmart. And I think the key thing that made that a successful strategic program for all the state schools in Queensland was as you mentioned there, who's the target audience, and we had the target audience being the school teachers, the motivated, converted, but also within a team within the schools. It was critical about getting the factors, but also acknowledging they are busy people, and we built in to the funding formula for them facilitated support, professional developments, a whole lot of scaffolding around that key contact person in the school. So, and there's that with them factor, what's in it for them. So they get professional development support. They were given a guided hand with a facilitator for a whole year. So the whole project management structure was around supporting a school on a journey towards a sustainable future.
Yeah, that's a great one, Cam. Anything to do with professional development is always a great benefit, and support. Anything that helps people in their lives, you've hit the nail on the head there. It's just about putting on the hat of the person you're trying to engage with and thinking, what is it that will make their life easier? And if you can make your
exactly. It's more pulling them along rather than pushing them. As soon as you push somebody, you get resistance. If you encourage them through incentives and support and acknowledgement and rewards and all that, it's much better outcomes.
Yeah, great. Sorry, you're just a little bit soft there, but that's great. Okay. Well, if there's no one else, let's move on to the next thing to consider, which is collaboration. And we're all very good at collaborating, but it's just good to remember that collaboration doesn't just mean working with another section of your organisation or working with another organisation in your sector, such as a local council working with another local council. It also means working with organisations from other sectors, such as local schools in groups and stuff like that.
Erica, you're fading out. I'm not sure about anybody else, but I can hardly hear you now.
Yeah, same.
Oh, okay.
Yep, same.
No, I can't hear you at all now. While Erica works on that, have a think. You can't hear you, Erica, sorry. You can see where she was going with the one about collaborating with different sectors, and we can see that Erica was going to go out to the group again and see, bearing in mind that she was focused on cross-sectoral collaboration there. So does anyone have any examples of success or challenges with that?
Can you hear me now?
Sure can.
Great. Something happened to the microphone on my laptop. Thank goodness for headphones.
You need to put more money in.
Need to put more money into my, yes, it is an old laptop. The joys of working for yourself.
Back to you then, Erica, although did anyone want to jump in? Because I just introduced it. If you're ready to go, I'm sure Erica would be happy.
Okay. And look, you know, collaborating is important because, as you know, it then means you get to access all of these resources that you don't have, but your collaborators have. You know, their time, their knowledge, materials that they have, and also their expertise. But it's really important to note when you're collaborating on a project that not everyone has to be involved in the delivery or the implementation of the project. When we ran this project with the networks around New South Wales, and the networks were developing their projects and wanting to get collaborators. Often people are reluctant to collaborate because they think it means they're putting their hand up to do a whole heap of work that they don't have time to do. But people are always really reassured when they realise that you may only be asking them to contribute for a short period of time towards the project, and that it's really key to sort of think about what people like doing, because you know, you might have someone within your network who you know, really loves evaluating projects and can just help you for a little bit on your evaluation plan. Or there might be someone, you know, at an organisation in the town that's a great photographer, and they'll just be happy to collaborate and just come along to your event and take photos for you. So they're all examples of collaboration. It doesn't have to be a big commitment from the people that are collaborating with you. So, you know, stakeholders are any people or groups who are interested in, concerned about, or affected by the issue your project is addressing and or your project and its outcomes. So they include your target audience, the general community, the organisations, and the organisations in your project team and of your collaborators. So your communication strategy can be as simple as a list of your stakeholders, what your key communication message is for each and how you're going to reach them. And the biggest tip to successfully communicating with your stakeholders is to take off your environmental educator hat and think about developing a message that will resonate with people who don't have an interest in the environment. And, you know, obviously this is really important when you're wanting to reach beyond the converted usual suspects and engaging with your wider community. You know, Keep Australia Beautiful, they figured it out a long time ago. You know, all of their litter messaging was about, you know, keep our town beautiful. They didn't say pick up litter. So that's a nice one to see how they were onto it a long time ago. And it's also great if you can develop communication messages that actually don't mention the environment at all. They're always the best communication messages. Of course, you know, once people engage with your projects or they come to your activity, you educate them about the environment, but you risk turning away all of the non-environmentally minded people of whom are basically the majority of our population, if you just sell your education activity as something for greenie tree huggers, which I am, and which we all are. And there's nothing wrong with being that, but we're just the minority. What do you want your project to achieve, and how will you measure this? This is where we get into the fun part, which is evaluation, how you evaluate your project. It's not only really important to your managers and organisations, but it should be really important to you, because as environmental educators, we want to know that the projects we've worked on really hard and slaved away on have actually made a difference to the environment. And the way that we find this out is by developing an outcomes hierarchy framework. And doing this in an outcomes hierarchy table. And this is a monitoring and evaluation tool, and it shows the logic of your project. It shows how your activities will achieve your project's outcomes and how it will be monitored and evaluated. So let's look at an example outcomes hierarchy table. And this example is from the resource Does Your Project Make a Difference? A Guide to Evaluating Environmental Projects and Programs. This is a nice little book which we have an online link to on our website that Graham Collier developed about 15 years ago for the New South Wales EPA. And it was in workshops that Graham was running where I learnt about evaluation and the importance of really thinking about this right from the start so that you get your project right from the start. So I'm going to run through this table and show you the order in which you would fill out this outcomes hierarchy table. So let's just for the next few minutes let's imagine you are an environmental educator and you work for Never Vale Council. Your council area has the problem that sediment from building sites is polluting the stormwater, and you want to increase the number of builders who are using sediment fences and placing sandbags around the stormwater drains, which is best practice sediment and erosion control. So you would start by asking yourself, what is the ultimate outcome you want your project to have on improving or protecting the environment? So the ultimate outcome of this project is decreased sedimentation of stormwater and waterways from building sites. You now go to the bottom of the table and you look at your activities and you work your way back up to work out how your education activities, your education and engagement activities will achieve your ultimate outcome of helping the environment. So the activities you are running are workshops for builders. The aim of the best practice education activity is to get your audience to make a commitment to take action. And this is your immediate outcome. And you've created the Responsible Builders program to give recognition to builders doing the right thing with their sediment erosion control. So the outcome you want from your workshops is that builders sign up to be part of the program. And your program logic is that by getting builders to sign up and make a public commitment, combined with the community recognition and support from council, will result in builders from the workshops implementing best practice sediment and erosion control practices on their building sites. And this will lead to the ultimate outcome of improved and protected waterways. So once you've figured out these outcomes, you then move across and work out how you're going to evaluate each outcome. So the question that you need to answer to evaluate the workshops would be, well, were the workshops a success? Did builders learn about their environmental responsibilities, and did they learn about what best practice is? The indicators of success for these workshops would be the number of participants that come to the workshops, would be that the workshops were well evaluated, so people enjoyed them, and also an increase in knowledge, so people learnt from them. And your data sources for these indicators would be your attendance records and your survey of participants at the start and the end of the workshop. Moving up to your immediate outcome of builders making a commitment to improve their practices, the question you need to answer to evaluate this outcome is pretty simple. Did builders sign up to the council's Responsible Builders program? And the indicator of success is the number of builders who have signed up. And your data source for this is your post-workshop survey, where you ask them to tick a box if they're interested in signing up. So it's not really rocket science, but we're just going through a process here. So for your intermediate outcome of builders carrying out best practice sediment and erosion control, your evaluation question would simply be, have builders improved their practices? And the indicators of success for this is where you need to obviously collaborate with other people in council to find out, have there been an increase in the number of builders improving their sediment and erosion control practices? And has there been a decrease in the number of infringement notices issued to builders? And your data sources for this would be your building approval and development application reports, feedback and meetings that the council staff have, and also the infringement reports. So finally, for your ultimate outcome, your evaluation question is there a reduction in sediments in the stormwater? And was this reduction caused by improved sediment and erosion control practices? Indicators of success for this would be visual and photographic evidence that the rangers are taking when they're out on site. Also the amount of sediment trapped in the gross pollutant traps, and obviously water quality results. And your data sources for this will be photos, site reports, and monitoring and maintenance and water quality reports. So as you can see, the outcomes hierarchy table is a plan of how your education activities are going to engage the community to make behaviour changes that will benefit the environment. And when you first do an outcomes hierarchy framework, it can seem a bit overwhelming, and it does take a bit of time to fill in the table. But like anything, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. But it's just really important to do this in the planning stage before you start your project. It's very critical to do it at the start, because if you don't do this and you try and evaluate your project on the run, once you've already started it, you may risk missing an opportunity to gather time-sensitive data, such as, knowledge and awareness of your participants before they start your project. Now, obviously, we've just skimmed through this quickly. You may be all familiar with this and you do this already, but if you haven't, we have a lot of information on the A2E2 New South Wales website on how to design behaviour change programs and commitments and community-based social marketing, because we have a lot of links to Les Robinson's website and the Canadian guru of all of this, Douglas McKenzie Moore. Has anyone got any questions or comments about the outcomes hierarchy framework? Maybe you use it and there's limitations, or maybe you use it and you find it really helpful. Does anyone want to sort of join in, or maybe you have some questions about using it?
It's Sandra here from Broome. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly. Yeah. Thanks, Sandra.
What I've been thinking about since your first questions that you've asked is you're coming from a certain paradigm, which I think is quite interesting, and it doesn't include all environmental education or sustainability education. For instance, this assumes that you want to get a message across and that you're delivering. And as soon as you used the word delivering, I thought, oh, I wonder what she means by delivering. It means you want somebody else to do something. And there are other ways. For instance, a whole lot of groups and people coming together and making decisions about how they will make change together. And so there's just a comment for you. And the other one is stakeholders. There are, you know, you acknowledged country at the start. I think it depends how you understand the word stakeholders, because some Aboriginal groups say, and rightly so, never see us as stakeholders, because your stakeholders are self-nominated groups, right? And Aboriginal groups say, we are the owners of this place. We are not a stakeholder. And this is, for instance, in a lot of work that's going on in the Fitzroy Valley. You will have heard about wanting to dam rivers in the Kimberley and so on. And that's where this has come up. We are not stakeholders, the same as all these other Johnny-come-latelys who are, you know, the people you might consider stakeholders. We are the native title owners here. This is us, you ask us. And yeah, so there's just a few ideas. And similarly, the business about outcomes hierarchy framework, who decides how it will be evaluated. So if you've got a grant, obviously the grant holder does, and therefore it's, you know, a delivery, standard delivery model. But yeah, there's some interesting throwaway comments for you.
Yeah, look, great comment, Sandra. And I hope you stick around, because we are going to be having discussion around the education for sustainability principles that take into account, you know, actually engaging your community to find out how they want to be involved in a program. So having participatory decision making. So that's fantastic that you've brought that up. We'll have discussion about that soon. And yeah, look, you know, this is a plan for us as educators that we use, and there's a lot of labels and terms in there that mean different things to different people. And obviously, you know, the labels that we have to put on people within this context, it's not necessarily, you know, the language that we would use when engaging with our communities. Yeah, because doing this is very much, as you said, it's for funding, and and this best practice plan has come about to try and help educators in New South Wales in particular increase their chances of funding, because these are the hoops that government make us jump through, and we all have different opinions on that, and it can be frustrating and not really reflective of sort of where we are in our communities. So yeah, there's limitations with anything, but that's a great discussion. So please keep all those thoughts really active, because we'll get into the discussion in a second, unless anyone else had any questions or comments about the outcomes hierarchy framework, or perhaps people have used it. Okay, I'll probably take that as I'll keep on going through. So, and look, you know, just apologies if anyone's sitting there out there and going, I know all of this stuff already. It's, you know, environmental educators come into A squared, E squared at all different levels. You know, we often have brand newbies and people who have been doing it for years. So hopefully the people who are sitting there now and have been doing this for years and know all of this, your contribution to the discussion is going to be really, really helpful for us. And hopefully for people who are maybe new to this, I'm hoping that this is helpful to you.
Can I just sing out and say one thing?
Yes.
Nobody knows all of this. Otherwise the world wouldn't be the way it was. There you go.
Thanks, Sandra.
We all need to learn.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. Okay, so look, the last couple of ones are reflection. Obviously, reflection is really important. That's what we're doing now. And it's really important to the success of your project. So it needs to be undertaken throughout your project, not just at the end. Often people just sort of think it's something you do at the end, but doing it throughout the project allows you to continuously improve your project based on what your reflections are. You know, people use terms like using a feedback loop or adaptive project management. But it really also means that when you're looking at your evaluation, it allows you to go, oh, that workshop didn't actually work. We didn't get the outcomes we needed. So we now need to tweak our projects, do a different activity, run the workshop again so it does achieve what we wanted to. And that's why doing it throughout means that you don't get to the end of the project, reflect and realize, oh, you missed your chance and, you know, you couldn't achieve your outcomes because there was that one thing at the start that you got wrong. And then how are you going to share your project's outcomes with others? That's really important. It's also known as dissemination, and it can be as simple as, you know, a final report to your management or just a media release or a case study. So wrapping up, why make your next project a best practice project? It helps you to get better organisational buy-in on your sustainability education projects, because you're showing how relevant it is and you're showing that your education project is going to help the environment. It increases your likelihood of getting government funding because it makes your project so accountable and it shows that you've thought about it all. It also helps you to increase your success at winning awards. Awards aren't really an ego thing. I like to think of them as an insurance policy against funding cuts and restructures. And I've seen that in action with the project I worked on, and we won an award. And every time they kept on trying to cut it out of the structure, we kept on whipping that award back out and referred to our programs as award winning. And the project is still running today, hooray, thanks to a whole lot of other things. Also, best practice projects, they lift the profile of sustainability education and engagement in your organisation and your region. And we're all really passionate about environmental education, and we know what a good thing that is. And best practice also validates the need for sustainability education initiatives because it says sustainability education works. So, hey, we need to do it more. So, thank you for listening to me rabbit on. I'm now going to mute and pass the microphone over to Jem for our discussion.
Thanks, Erica. Appreciate it. Could you turn off the screen share for a minute so we can each see each other a bit better in case we do get into a discussion? Cam, I see in the chat you need to go meeting the conference. Another one, I thought you already met with the conference planning people all day. But anyway, Cam, thanks for joining us for a bit and have a good one, mate. Okay, so look, there was a few people. So what the structure was from now on is very loose. I thought we would try to see if there was some discussion arising from Erica's outline of the guide document that we've produced, and then just broaden that out to whatever you want to talk about, any stories you can share or issues you can raise, questions you can ask from a support group here. And then we've got some issues or questions to prompt discussion that we can flick to if need be. And we hope to get a chance to do that because they're things that, that Mel and Sue have put together that are good discussion points. So hopefully we can get into that as well. But first, yeah, wanted to open it up to everyone to you know, let you steer things for a while. Just before we start that, then there was a few people who weren't in on the meeting at the start when we did a little icebreaker and introduced ourselves a little. So could I ask people who weren't there in the first sort of 10 minutes or so. I just saw a sneaky peek from Barbara or someone there on the video, just poked their head around the corner. So I think, Bob, I can see you've just joined us. G'day, Bob, would you like to tell us where you are geographically or where you work or just some little something?
For my tardy arrival, I just got caught up on another call. I'm based in Sydney. My business is Water Ups from Down Under. We're members of Eastward, Eastward, and I'm a member of the NC committee as well. So I just saw some of the index of the topics you were talking about. I was quite interested, so I'm happy to sit and see what you guys have been up to.
Good on you, Bob. Thanks for joining us, mate. Yeah, so we're just moving to the open discussion after Erica's outlined a bunch of points in a presentation. That's available on the website if you want to go back to look at the recording of this or download the actual guide to best practice. Now, who else didn't we have at the start? Kathleen and Joanne, are you guys there and able to unmute to say g'day? I'm not sure. I think, am I right that everyone...
Hi,
hi, Jo.
This is Jo. I'm in the Northern Territory and it's one of my first Zoom experiences, so I'm just a beginner.
Good on you. Welcome. Okay, does anyone else want to say g'day? No, probably not. Okay, all right. And so what about the stuff that Erica just went through? Sandra had some good thought-provoking questions in there, which we could explore a bit more now too. Or are there other issues someone would like to raise?
I just had a point to make. I think in the notes that you're writing up, Erica, I reckon you should somehow change the wording of government funding to other support, just to something more broad, because it's not just government funding that you might be seeking. It might be in-kind support from your local council or a local business, or it might be some philanthropic support in terms of monetary funds that the project might be seeking. So I think just calling it government funding is just a little bit narrow. That was all for now.
Thanks, Andy. Actually, Andy, it occurred to me I was interested in your thoughts. It's putting you on the spot a bit, I'm afraid, mate, but I was wondering how these sorts of guiding principles and structures towards framing up a best practice project, how does that, or what would you do with something like that when you're strategically planning within state government? Is there any real link there, or is what you do just so different that this document doesn't really?
No, I think it's good, and it particularly gives people like me a framework to so you don't miss stuff. I mean, inherently, I think as we get older, we do a lot of stuff by rote or by experience, and there's lots of research to suggest that formal learning, goes hand in hand with the experience of practice from practitioners. So I think it's good to have both things, because sometimes you skip over, and it's a good way to double check back that you've covered all your bases, I guess, not in terms of any mandated stuff or legislative stuff perhaps, but just you've gone through the right logical steps that have been thought out and mapped out so that you do achieve best practice. So I think it's handy stuff for anybody, I reckon.
Yeah, look, I agree. And look, to be honest, there are plenty of things I've done even since sort of thinking about these structures that don't tick all the boxes, and I wouldn't necessarily claim them to be best practice projects, but by reflecting on them, you can still find some improvements, I think, and add on and maybe try a bit harder in a few areas.
Yeah, and look, I think there's areas where you don't get time because we're all running really busy projects, or living in busy worlds, and you don't get time to do that reflection and evaluation. But it provides some logic and some justification for doing that as well. You know, you can, because your manager might be saying, you know, let's move on to the next project and finish that one up. But if it's in the structure that you need to do that evaluation and reflection or or sharing the learnings, then it adds weight to its veracity, I guess, and kind of forces you to do that stuff that might be otherwise easily stepped over.
Jem, do you mind if I jump in? I was just thinking about Sandra's comments as well during Erica's presentation, and I think it's a really interesting point to raise in how do you apply this outside of an organisational context, because obviously environmental ed happens in a whole bunch of forms outside of formal government or not-for-profit structures. But I'd be interested to hear Sandra and others' reflections who have done that more participatory community decision-making process as a regular part of their work, whether this framework and logic and even some of the guiding principles are still inherently part of a lot of those processes. I mean, maybe you don't sit down and fill in a table and work through the hierarchy maybe in such a detailed sense as you might in an organisational perspective, but I would imagine sitting down with a group of residents or of a local community and we're trying to work out how we're going to get to an outcome together in a participatory way, there might be a different process for how we decide what our ultimate outcome is, and a different process as to what our activities are and what our intermediate and long-term sort of goals are. But I would expect that, even within that community, you need some kind of structure like that to know whether you're achieving what you want to achieve, or else it becomes a bit of a talk fest and a lot of people throwing ideas around, but no real structure to get to getting something done. And even reflecting on, are we growing towards our outcome as a community? Are we achieving where we're going? I'm just wondering if perhaps there are elements of this that can still be applied and useful. Maybe, as Erica said, it's not using the same terminology or the same words or maybe the same really rigid structure. But just interested to hear, I assume there's still logic behind the way you engage a community and get a participatory process happening that has real meaning and real outcome. And so thought I'd throw that out there for comment from others more experienced than me. Yeah,
100% I agree.
And I'm not more experienced than you, Mel, but I'm going to jump in because I used this plan recently just as a volunteer when we're up here in the mid-north coast. We had a few friends in the local Greens group got in contact with my husband because he makes videos and does filmmaking, and they said, we'd really like to make a video to promote the concept of a Great Koala National Park. And they had some ideas, and I used the best practice plan to help a whole group of people, volunteers, the NPA, the local green group, and the steering committee to collaboratively, using the plan to collaboratively come up with a plan on how we could make a video that would actually help get support for the national park. And I think that's the key, that involving people and getting their feedback and getting their input into, perhaps a program logic is really important. And although, they might not read through the whole thing, and like always, we're often just the bridge between different parties, it was reassuring to see that the groups that we were engaging with and meeting with at the local cafe and emailing saw the value in doing that as a process, and they said, this was really good, like we can see how, like, what the plan is, and as you said, Mel, I think it helped people to know that all the work that they were doing as volunteers was actually going to work towards a result that everyone had decided upon. So anyway, that's my little comment.
Erica, that's interesting because you would have also built capacity amongst that group in the planning process as well, not just the delivery of the plan itself.
Yeah, and that was my other key aim, and that is a powerful thing to, you do want to build the capacity of others so that they can be more effective in whatever they do, particularly volunteers who do everything in their own time. So, Jem, did you want me to bring up go back to the screen share and bring up those discussion topics?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that Mel had a couple there, so I'll hand over to Mel. But while Eric is getting that up, give us a wave or just shout out if anyone wanted to raise anything before we look at a couple of documented.
Yeah, Jem, I might just make a comment. I was just thinking about my involvement in judging the Local Government Environment Education Awards. And this is a generalisation, but we have talked about in New South Wales, there has been a lack of support, and it's really interesting, in my opinion, the ultimate outcome and that link to a higher outcome is missing. And so it tends to be just that bottom run of just looking at the activity and the number of people that were engaged in that activity. And we've lost, it's a generalisation, I know, but we've lost in New South Wales that deeper understanding of what environmental education and engagement is, so I do think there is value in this discussion. And yeah, so that's just my opinion for a little bit.
I wanted to come back to the point that Sandra was making before about Indigenous, not stakeholders. I'm part of a friends group that are just starting a project which involves recording birdsong in the national park. And it was very interesting at a meeting we had recently. One of the members who's very involved in the local reconciliation group was saying that rather than, 3/4 of the way through the sort of project plan, having take this to the local Aboriginal group and see what they think of it, whereas it should have been like right at the start to approach them and say, this is your land. Are there things you want to learn or to achieve or whatever, so that it's almost like predating even the collaboration aspect of things. And I don't know how you do that. I don't know if anyone has insight into how you do that, because obviously you've got your own motivators, but to really have that partnership or...
Yeah, to be so genuinely open to somebody else telling you how to do something that you've already got in the back of your mind, inevitably, or you wouldn't be asking the question. It is going to be challenging, isn't it?
Yeah. So I don't know if anyone's had more experience with that than I have, perhaps.
Sandra, can you give us any sort of examples or?
Sorry, can you just ask the question again? That I just had a red email coming through that I needed to deal with on the spot. Sorry, what was the question? Just in a nutshell.
I was talking about rather than seeing the Indigenous people as stakeholders and involving them 3/4 of the way through the process, how can you involve them in the planning before there's planning?
Yeah, just that. Just invite people to have conversations right at the very beginning. Go to the Aboriginal groups. I mean, it depends who's making the initiative. Hopefully the initiative comes from Aboriginal groups as well. But yeah, go to Aboriginal groups first, always. That's the whole idea of acknowledging people who come from country. So that's the way we work in the Kimberley.
Yeah, I guess it's quite different for some of us where, I'm in Geelong in Victoria, and, we have a couple of Aboriginal cooperatives, but it's difficult a lot of the time to actually know who to go to, how to approach them, when to approach them. And if you've got an idea in the back of your head, how do you go and say, we'd like to do this. Do you see value in it? Would you like to be involved? I don't, yeah.
Hey, you know, it's all about relationship from the beginning. Maybe this is one of my big things in the world, actually. Environmental education and Aboriginal studies, Aboriginal education have to be much more close together than they are for obvious sorts of reasons. There are traditional knowledges that are really, really important for all Australians. So, you know, all of us need to kind of be making those grassroots sorts of relationships, I think, by knocking at the door if you don't know anyone that's going to make introductions. But usually there are groups, for example, education departments have Aboriginal liaison officers. Some shires have groups, you know, that work together, NRM, ranger sorts of groups. There's usually groups handy that can make links for you at the start, and then it's up to us to keep those relationships strong. The world's all about relationships. That's my view of the world.
And one of the approaches that I've used successfully is to involve them in the co-design, involve any groups in the co-design early, you know, at the outset, by way of saying, look, we think we have this evidence, we think there's an issue, we think this might be the solution. What do you think? You know, and just not assuming that we have, or that you have the answers to the problem, and not assuming that that's actually the problem either. The problem might be much deeper than that. It might be a much higher level of that. It might have other problems spinning off that can be answered by the same project. But until you ask those questions of all the things, and the other question is, who else should be involved in the discussion? That's always a critical one to ask, because they'll know people that you don't know and that you haven't considered in co-designing that project. And the project that you end up designing with all those stakeholders from the beginning will be a much better, more effective output, I would suggest.
I've always found when working with Aboriginal people is to meet on country. So if you want to do a project, whether it be your local park, your local wetland or something, is to invite everybody to morning tea, afternoon tea out on country.
Yeah, and it'll be a very different project right from the beginning. It'll be much more formal. It won't be power over. It'll be more collaborative, more participative, more engaged, more engaging. And yeah.
But don't also lose sight of the fact that all of it is on country. I wouldn't put a place, a place marker on something that's on country, because it automatically assumes that other places are off country. It's all on country.
Well, not so much that, but just working with Aboriginal people rather than inviting them into a meeting place. If you actually go, I'm talking about working in the Kimberley, which I spent 9 years working in the Kimberley. So if you want to do a project on the wetland and get grants, well, then the best thing is to go out to that wetland and invite them. And I've done other similar projects, trying to get school involved with whether it be land care or bush rangers. You just get more communication. They feel more comfortable. And this is a generalisation, I know. But, just my experience trying to get involved with local Indigenous people. And many areas, you've got different language groups that share the same area as well. And that's an added complexity. But that's what I say. I've just found that working at the botanical trail or the wetland, it's just much easier.
Yeah, it's actually about our attitude as environmental educators as well. And it's really hard to say that, but if you've got a learning stance and if you actually are open-minded and prepared to, work with people instead of telling people what you do, it actually makes a big difference. It's where your heart is, the way you wear your heart,
Yeah, I think, that point, Sandra, about it being just really about relationships is such a good one. I remember when I first started working in the eastern suburbs, I didn't have a particular project coming up or anything really happening, but one of the first things that I wanted to seek out was what connections do we have and what groups are out there that are representative of the Aboriginal people of this area, and connected with Isora, and found that just sort of creating that relationship before I even had a request. There wasn't a particular project coming up. It was just, hey, I'm here, you're here, we're both trying to do stuff, let's stay in touch. And then when projects did come up that, you know, that I thought this is something that we might have support to do from the government side, there was already that dialogue happening of coming in and saying, you know, what do you think, and what are you guys working on, and how do you feel about you know, a project like this, or us, you know, looking further into this. So it's even just for those of us who are operating at a more local level, not sort of waiting till a project started to kind of go through the tick box of, okay, step one, find my local Aboriginal representatives to connect with. Hopefully that those relationships are starting to be built just from being in place and on country with them, and yeah, letting each other know that we're here and are working on stuff.
So, Erica, did you want me to just look at that education for sustainability principles? And I suppose the reason why I thought that that would be a nice discussion point is that as a long-time educator, this has been the methodology framework that I've used, and have really liked having some of those points to check that they're in my projects. And it also for me, it links us to the UN, so that we're looking at what an education for sustainability project would have across the globe. So we're actually connected to more than just what we're doing, a little project here in New South Wales, which is a really good project here in New South Wales. But I think that sort of comes into what Sandra was talking about, ensuring that we are participatory and we are locally relevant and we are values driven and we are holistic in the way we look at our projects. So the point of reflection here was to just ask if you could think of a project that you've done or you're currently doing, and can you see those points within your project as a reflection? And I don't think every project has to have everything, but for me, it's just a check. It's a check to ensure that we do have education for sustainability happening. So I'll leave it there and just ask if anybody would like to share maybe.
We'll just quickly say goodbye to Sandra first, I think, because she's going. So
yep.
Sandra.
Thank you, everyone. All the best. Enjoy the conference.
Thanks, Sandra.
Bye.
So I think for me, yeah, it's a good list, and I'm thinking I need to just have a few of these lists of different sort of ways of looking at things, which there's a lot of overlap between these and the guiding principles and the this and that, but yeah, they each sort of give you a little bit of a different twist and might spark something new. Yeah, I'm thinking of a number of projects that have different elements of those, but not necessarily all of them, which I know you said's okay, but it's good to identify the gaps.
And I think, like any planning document, it's a tick. It just reminds you of things to include, which is great. I'd like to see these in a format that I can put them on my wall.
Yeah, that's right. That's something we can do, Andy. We'll PDF
Erica,
it.
we need a graphic designer. Erica.
Well, I'm hoping that we get a bit more conversation out of everyone so that we can go back and put these EFS, like show how the guide is linking to these EFS principles so that people can do exactly that.
And there is a need for us maybe as educators to link it to the Sustainable Development Goals, which is another layer for us to always be trying to link to as well, which is, yeah. The other discussion question that I was wanting to ask people to, and maybe that it might be a bit of an easier one to get people sharing on, is what are your measures of success? And I mentioned that when I read about a project, I really hate to see how many people were sitting on a seat in a workshop, because it just doesn't tell me anything. So I'm hoping there's some other ways that we're measuring success in our projects, and would love to hear them. Hopefully you did something while you were sitting on that seat in that workshop.
It does say something about the catering though. We've been mucking around with some of our recently with some of our community engagement events at things like the New South Wales Saving Our Species project or program, where we go out and tell people about the Saving Our Species, and we've kind of we're developing a process whereby we might put a marker, even putting a ball from one jar to the other jar, when we have what we describe as a meaningful conversation. That's a bit arbitrary though, it's a bit hard to say. I've kind of linked it to are people, how many people have sought further information on the topic that you're trying to sell to them, or how many people have signed up for a particular program on a website that you've got open on the day. But it's always a difficult one.
Yeah.
It is difficult, isn't it? Because quite often the measure of true success might not be for a year, 2 years, or 10 years. People don't even know themselves that you've been successful at engaging them, or that they've felt like a participant and enabled to do something, until they reflect on, oh, that was because of this, a conversation I had a year ago, or this event I went to, or this email I saw, or this person that challenged me to think in a different way, or I felt welcomed into a community and involved in this way, or whatever the activity was that they might have been a part of. So I think it's also that ability as educators to kind of keep our ears and eyes open for those long-term measures of success as well, and encouraging people to keep self-reflecting and to find their own reason to sort of try and pinpoint where the change in themselves is happening as well.
Yeah, look, and I found that with the last project, with working with the networks around New South Wales, obviously we had a lot of evaluation where a lot of communication was by email, and we were asking people to do surveys by email, which is always great and great data. But the data that I find most useful are the conversations where I pick up the phone and just have a chat to someone, because it always, I don't know why it surprises me, but it always surprises me how much really important information people will share with me over the phone that they didn't put in a survey, or that they didn't send in an email. Yeah, so those sort of, and quite often they're just sort of incidental conversations you have when you weren't particularly, trying to find that out. or you weren't ringing someone to ask them a particular question, but you know, the art of just conversation and having that time to chat with people does reveal so much really important data about your projects. So I suppose like allowing for that just personal, you know, connection, you know, having meetings with people and having phone calls can really just be amazing in what you find out that you didn't, you know, think that they'd gained from something. So I think that's something that we often feel really time pressured to do, but you know, that's why social marketers have focus groups. That's why they get people in a room to chat about what, you know, just to ask some questions and things, because it's just amazing what comes out when people are sort of given that opportunity.
But then, Erica, the follow-up from that, and the important follow-up from that is to actually be able to document that in the form of, you know, just a half-page case study or a short video snip or something that's capturable and that can be used to promote the success to other people.
Yeah, that's right. And it's so powerful. You know, a one-sentence testimonial about something is a very powerful way of, you know, showing the success of a project.
I think success can be measured along the way too. I mean, if you have, you know, somebody engages as a volunteer in a project that you're doing, for example, that might be a success for that period of time, but it's also important to measure the successes that come from that. You know, you might get all sorts of snowball outcomes from that one project that you ran that initially engaged with that person. They may go on to do bigger and better things. So it's important to try and track that through those stories as well.
For me, I'm a bit the opposite to probably Erica. I like the numbers. So I like to see a good data collection methodology. I like to see, you know, baseline data and follow-up studies and a good scientific method for how it's all done. So that's just a personal thing, but you see a lot of numbers spouted out, but when you look at the fine print, or if it's even there, you can't actually have any faith in the numbers. So I think a good methodology really critical as well.
I think it depends so much on the nature of your project as well, because I mean, something like the sediment thing, they had some really specific measures of success that, you know, were they aiming to reduce sediment? In the end, did they do that? There's a really clear cut you know, measure of success, and I know there were sort of steps along the way, but sometimes, you know, it's I don't know, a bit more amorphous than that, and then it is, you know, really trying to track down that, well, what actually is the goal of the project and how are we going to measure it, and, you know, is it that, you know, people know that the brush-tailed phasca gull exists, which is something I'm involved with down here at the moment. Or is it that we've got, you know, 5 schools building nest boxes? Or is it that we've got a whole education project developed and, you know, schools engaging in it? I think it's, which is, I hadn't seen that hierarchy of outcomes before, specifically like that. I actually quite like that as a way to be thinking about those different sort of types of outcomes and measures of success.
Yeah, I think that's one of the critical things about that, is the value in the different types of measures for the different stages of your project. And not that you don't start measuring your end result at the start, but it's a different measure for that end result to what it is for your intermediate.
And bums on seats is okay.
Shall we see just quickly see what was on those other couple of slides of prompting questions? I think we're at time. I'm not in a rush to go, but obviously some people are heading off and whatnot. But Erica, I don't remember what was on the. Oh, there they are. The other prompting questions.
I think the barriers one is an interesting one, because I think in an ideal world, of course, we'd all love to run a best practice project all the time. And I think we would be doing that if there were no barriers, but there clearly are, because we're not. So I think it'd be interesting to hear the barriers and how they can be overcome perhaps. And there's a subsequent question that kind of ties in about, how can we support each other better to run our best practice projects that might help address some of the barriers or reasons why we're not doing this. So maybe the first one is a little PDF that helps summarize the guiding principles that we can have in front of us to remind us each time. And maybe these resources help to have templates to fill in, but what are the other barriers and how can we work to overcome them together?
I found until recently, for me, there was a bit of a 5-year gap in the capacity of some of my networks to collaborate. So they're kind of going back 10 years was a good energy in this area for people from state government departments, local councils, some community members, community schools, whatever. They would come together and they had permission from their organisation to do that. Sometimes not always on business time, but to be involved was good and accepted. And then there was a big patch where people were so restrained and were able to do from their organisational perspective that it was quite hard. And now I think maybe it's just swinging back the other way a bit.
I think one of the barriers that I've always come across too is that quite often as environmental educators we work in isolation. We're working in our own little bubbles because a lot of the projects or the teams that I've worked in as well, there's only one of me, but there's several of the other people doing other work. So it's good to have these networks active and regularly communicating so that you can bounce ideas off other people, because often you're working not in isolation, but you are working in your own little cone of silence.
Yeah, and maybe, Andy, what you're saying is a bit of an answer to Jem's question. Those continued networks allow, do improve that opportunity for collaboration. Jem, I'd be interested for you to reflect upon whether, active networks have got anything to do with, people's ability to collaborate. Obviously, when organisations are going through restructures and things like that, it is very hard to get people to collaborate. But maybe if you have that sort of continued relationship with people, maybe being part of regional networks may be a way to overcome that resistance. That is a barrier.
I think it really feeds people. It feeds on itself too. So once a bit of energy starts and people can see that it would be a productive use of their time, they can find rationale for it more easily. Whereas when it has low energy, it's not giving back. So it fails. But yeah, once it gets up and running, the networks or the collaboration, it sort of can be more self-perpetuating with a bit of constant input, of course.
Yeah, and I think as long as you're not meeting for the sake of meeting, regular meetings are more beneficial than, say, 6-monthly intersections of ideas.
Mel,
in Victoria, sorry, I think that was Erica. So, do you have sort of geographically based environmental education networks down there at all? Is there something you're part of, or a more local one in your Geelong area?
There are school networks, but I've been a little bit lapsed the last couple of years. So there was sort of some movement in that direction a couple of years ago, but not really the same way that there seems to be in New South Wales. So the school ones have basically been with the Resource Smart Sustainable Schools initiative, and there are some really good networks, and then there are some practically non-existent networks. But it's hard for people outside the school system to build those links. I think especially if you're not working for a big organisation like the zoo or Parks Vic or something.
Mm. Yeah, we found the same thing up here. Some of our networks were historically local government networks. So another example of that sort of exclusivity. They didn't necessarily want to be open to other sectors, partly because I think they found value in being able to talk openly about their internal business without having, other people then hold them accountable or have expectations of them based on a casual conversation.
Sorry,
local
guys,
councils.
I'm going to have to go. I'm going to go. See ya.
See you, Andy. Cheers, mate.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've worked in local council in the past. It's interesting, people within the same council don't even know what each other does. And I was, one of those people sitting there being like the only person doing environmental education. And then there was, there was a bit of the sustainability team, but, I was busily just sending out my tentacles, the wrong word, to find who in council would be useful, and ended up with from the engineering department, because they could get us maps of waterways and like drainage and like how everything connected up under the ground, which was really valuable because we were doing a lot of like litter education and stormwater and stuff. So, and then reaching out to the people in the community, finding out when they're doing like a big suction vacuum truck thing, cleaning out the stormwater drains and stuff. Mm. So I think, sometimes it's that creating your own network.
Yeah, and that it can be time consuming, can't it? But big value available with all the existing knowledge. You don't have to find out so much of this stuff yourself. It's out there.
Yeah.
I was just about to ask Sarah, who dropped in for a while, whether she wanted to sing out about something, but she's just left too. So it's just us now. And I guess, does anyone else want to say anything before we finish up? Probably not. Sing out if you do, but I'll just say, Carolyn, this is just you've got all these resources on the aaenewsouthwales.org.au website. So the guide is called Right from the Start. The outcomes hierarchy, if you want more examples of how it's used in practice, sort of step by step, that's in Does Your Project Make a Difference? There's stuff about case studies and lots in there. So yeah, check it out. And I think that's it. So thanks a lot, Erica and Mel and Sue, for your contributions, and to you too, Carolyn, of course. And Erica, you're in charge of the whole techno thing, so I'll just wave goodbye and you can shut us all down, I guess.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
We did it.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks for coming along.
Okay.
All right.
See you later, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.